On a quiet night in May 1983, in the peaceful town of Springfield, Oregon, a red Nissan Pulsar speeds toward the emergency entrance of McKenzie-Willamette Hospital. Its tires screech against the pavement as it makes a sharp turn into the driveway, nearly hitting a parked ambulance. The vehicle jerks to a halt, its headlights piercing through the dimly lit hospital entrance. The driver's side door swings open, and a woman stumbles out, her clothes disheveled, her left arm streaked with blood. Inside the car, the scene is pure horror. 3 young children lie motionless, their tiny bodies slumped against the seats, blood soaking into the fabric. The hospital staff rushes forward, their faces pale as they assess the victims. The youngest, little Jacob Dawson, is barely breathing. His chest rises and falls in uneven gasps, his small fingers twitching ever so slightly. Emily Dawson, the eldest at 8 years old, is unconscious, her face ghostly white. But 7-year-old Sarah Dawson, she is completely still. The warmth has already begun to fade from her tiny hands. Chaos erupts. Doctors and nurses scramble, shouting urgent commands. Gurneys roll across the cold linoleum floor. Bright overhead lights flicker on, illuminating the tragic scene. The mother, Linda Dawson, watches it all unfold. Her expression is unreadable, not the raw panic of a mother who has just witnessed an unspeakable act, but something else. Something eerily composed. A nurse reaches out to comfort her. "Ma'am, are you hurt?" Linda looks down at her arm, as if noticing the wound for the first time. It's a single gunshot, grazing her left forearm. Superficial. Not life-threatening. Nothing compared to what her children are enduring. The police arrive within minutes. 2 officers, their boots echoing down the sterile hospital hallways, approach Linda with cautious urgency. They need answers. "What happened?" one of them asks. Linda takes a deep breath, and her voice trembles not with sorrow, but with something else. "A man stopped us on the road," she says, her eyes darting from one officer to the other. "He wanted my car. When I refused, he pulled out a gun and he shot my babies." A ripple of silence follows her words. The officers exchange glances. A carjacking? On a lonely back road at night? Stranger things have happened. And yet, something feels off. "Can you describe the man?" Linda hesitates. "It was dark. I don't remember much. He had wild hair, maybe a beard. He was wearing. I think he was wearing jeans. Or maybe dark pants." The description is vague, unreliable. The officers know that trauma can cloud memory, but still her words feel rehearsed. Forced. One officer turns to the doctors, his voice tight. "What's the status of the children?" A grim-faced surgeon responds. "The girl Sarah, she didn't make it. The other 2, it's too soon to tell. But Emily, if she survives, she may have permanent damage." Another pause. Linda's lips press into a thin line. No tears. No gasping sobs. No collapsing in grief. Instead, she asks, "Can I see them?" The doctors hesitate. "Right now, they're in surgery." Linda nods, smoothing down her blood-stained blouse. "I understand." She understands. No screaming for her lost daughter. No collapsing to the ground, demanding to hold her children one last time. No anger, no desperate pleas for justice. Just understanding. The police take her statement, but the questions linger in their minds. A random act of violence? A mother's worst nightmare? Or is there something far more sinister lurking behind Linda Dawson's words? Detective Robert Hughes steps into the sterile, fluorescent-lit hallways of McKenzie-Willamette Hospital, his leather shoes clicking against the tile floor. The scent of antiseptic fills the air, mixing with the distant hum of medical equipment. He has seen his fair share of tragedies, but something about this case unsettles him. A mother carjacked, her children caught in the crossfire, yet only she escapes with a minor wound. It doesn't sit right. He makes his way to the emergency ward, where doctors and nurses rush past him, their faces drawn tight with exhaustion. Inside a quiet room, behind a thick glass partition, Emily Dawson lies unconscious, her fragile body barely visible beneath layers of hospital blankets. Tubes snake from her arms, a ventilator hisses beside her, and the rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor is the only sound in the room. The doctors say she may not wake up. If she does, she might never speak again. Across the hospital, Linda Dawson sits in an interview room, arms crossed over her chest. Her expression is composed, her voice measured as she retells the horrifying events of the night before. "We were driving home," she says, eyes flickering between the two officers seated across from her. "It was dark, maybe past 10. The road was empty. And then, he came out of nowhere." She exhales sharply, pressing a hand to her forehead as if recalling the memory is physically painful. "He had a gun. He told me to get out of the car. I refused. And then her voice catches, her eyes suddenly glassy. He shot them. My babies." Detective Hughes leans forward, his pen tapping against his notepad. "And then?" Linda's lips tremble. "He shot me, too. But I She looks down at her bandaged arm. "I don't know. I must have fought back. He ran off. I jumped in the car and drove straight here." Her words are heartbreaking. Tragic. And yet, something feels off. Hughes has spent years interviewing people, separating truth from lies, and something about Linda's version of events lacks weight. The details are vague, as if she's reciting a script rather than recalling a memory. Hughes clears his throat, shifting in his seat. "You mentioned the shooter had wild hair, a beard. Could you tell if he was white, black, Hispanic?" Linda hesitates. I don't know. It was dark. I think he was white. Or maybe not. His face was shadowed." Hughes makes a note. "Uncertain details. Hesitation. Possible deception." He leans back in his chair, studying her closely. No sign of bruising. No scratches, no defensive wounds, only the single, clean wound on her left arm. It's the kind of injury someone might give themselves if they wanted to appear like a victim. Before he can press further, a nurse appears in the doorway. "Detective, the children's father is here." Moments later, Daniel Dawson arrives, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. He rushes past the officers, barely acknowledging them as he reaches the doctor standing outside Emily's room. "How is she?" His voice is hoarse, raw with emotion. The doctor sighs. "She's stable for now, but it's critical. The next 48 hours are crucial." Daniel drags a hand down his face, turning to Hughes. "What happened? Who did this?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Hughes replies carefully. "Your wife says it was a carjacker." Daniel's expression darkens. He lets out a bitter laugh. "A carjacker?" His head shakes. "And he just shot all the kids but barely hurt her." There's something in his voice. Not just grief but doubt. Hughes narrows his eyes. "You don't believe her?" Daniel hesitates. "Linda, she loves attention. She always has. She likes being the center of things. But this his breath catches. This is insane." Hughes studies the man's posture, the way his hands shake. He isn't just mourning his daughter, he's questioning everything he thought he knew about the woman he once loved. A nurse clears her throat. "Mr. Dawson, do you want to see Emily?" Daniel exhales, nodding. "Yeah. Please." As he follows the nurse into the hospital room, Hughes watches him go. Something about this case is wrong. And he intends to find out what. The next morning, Hughes and his team drive to the alleged crime scene, a desolate stretch of road outside of town. It's eerily quiet, the only sound the rustling of wind through the trees. The early morning sun casts long shadows across the cracked asphalt. The lead forensic investigator, Detective Andrew Collins, steps out of his cruiser, stretching his arms. "Let's see what we've got." They begin a systematic search. No tire tracks. No bullet casings. No footprints. Nothing suggests a violent struggle took place here. The road is empty, undisturbed. Hughes kneels, running his fingers over the dirt. If someone had been here, there should be signs, scuff marks, displaced gravel, something. But the ground is pristine. One of the officers shakes his head. "This doesn't look like a crime scene." Hughes stands, dusting off his hands. He turns to Collins. "Where was the car when she said this happened?" Collins gestures down the road. "Right about there. Near that tree." Hughes walks to the indicated spot. He stands there for a long moment, scanning the surroundings. If Linda's story was true, there would be evidence of it. But there isn't. He exhales through his nose. "I think we're looking at the wrong suspect." Collins frowns. "What do you mean?" Hughes turns to him, his expression dark. "I don't think there ever was a carjacker." Meanwhile, inside the hospital, the air is heavy with tension. Linda sits in the waiting room, flipping absent-mindedly through a magazine, her legs crossed. Her posture is too relaxed for a grieving mother. A nurse walks past, glancing at her. No tears. No sobs. No breakdown. Just calm. Linda looks up, her lips curling into a tight smile. "Any updates on my daughter?" The nurse hesitates. "Emily is still unconscious, but stable." Linda tilts her head. "And Jacob?" "Also stable." Linda nods slowly, a flicker of something unreadable passing through her eyes. "Good." She stands, stretching her arms. "I should probably go home, get some rest." The nurse blinks. "You're leaving?" Linda shrugs. "The doctors are doing everything they can. What else can I do? What kind of mother leaves her children's bedside after such a horrific attack?" As Linda walks toward the exit, Detective Hughes watches from the end of the hallway. Everything in his gut tells him this woman is lying. And soon, he's going to prove it. The town of Springfield mourns. The loss of Sarah Dawson, a bright-eyed 7-year-old with endless curiosity, weighs heavily on the community. Her classmates leave hand-drawn pictures of flowers and angels outside her elementary school. Neighbors place candles and teddy bears on the steps of the Dawson home. A funeral is arranged, but there's one person who doesn't seem to carry the same grief as everyone else. Linda Dawson. She appears on television just days after the tragedy. Instead of a shattered mother, the audience sees something unsettling: a woman who smiles too much, who speaks with an eerie confidence, her voice unwavering. "The doctors say Emily might not survive," she tells the reporter, crossing her legs, perfectly poised in front of the cameras. "But I don't believe that. She's tough, just like her mother." There is no trace of sadness in her voice. No tears, no cracked sentences, no hesitation. The people watching at home shift in their seats. Something about the way Linda performs her grief feels wrong. Some shake their heads, excusing her strange reaction as shock. Others are less forgiving. Why does she seem excited? Why isn't she crying? What kind of mother acts like this? The whispers begin. The news stations replay her interview over and over. Psychologists debate her behavior. Some claim it's a coping mechanism, that some people react to tragedy by shutting down their emotions. Others disagree. She enjoys the attention, one analyst notes during a local broadcast. She isn't mourning. She's basking in the spotlight. And the more Linda appears in public, the clearer it becomes. She's not just telling her story. She's performing it. At a candlelight vigil for Sarah, she stands at the front, holding a framed picture of her daughter. Instead of standing quietly with the other grieving families, she gives a speech. Sarah wouldn't want us to be sad, she declares, smiling into the crowd. She would want us to be strong. The words might have been comforting if they weren't delivered with such enthusiasm. Detective Robert Hughes, watching from the back of the crowd, exhales slowly. His gut tells him this isn't just an unusual grieving mother. This is something else. The investigation into Linda Dawson takes a new turn. Hughes and his team start looking deeper into her past, tracing her steps before she moved to Oregon. It doesn't take long before they find Michael Reynolds. A name that keeps appearing in old records, in phone logs, in letters tucked away in Linda's belongings. Michael Reynolds, a married man from Arizona. The one who had no interest in children. The pieces start falling into place. Detective Hughes sits across from Michael Reynolds in a dimly lit interview room. The man shifts uncomfortably in his seat, rubbing his hands together. He doesn't look like someone who wants to be here. I don't have anything to do with this, he insists. I haven't spoken to Linda in months. Hughes remains silent, watching him. The man exhales sharply and shakes his head. I told her it was over. I told her I wasn't going to leave my wife. And I told her he stops, looking down. Told her what? Hughes presses. Michael clenches his jaw. That I didn't want kids. Hughes leans forward. And how did she take that? Michael laughs, but there's no humor in it. She didn't. She kept calling. Sending letters. Saying we were meant to be together. He swallows hard. I told her it wasn't going to happen. That I didn't want a family. Hughes scribbles something in his notebook, but he already knows. Linda wasn't just obsessed with Michael. She was willing to do anything to fit into his life. Even if that meant getting rid of her children. Back in Springfield, the whispers about Linda grow louder. People remember things they had overlooked before. How Linda would often complain about her children in casual conversations. How she had once joked, life would be so much easier without kids. How she had never seemed like the maternal type. The police start gathering statements. Friends, co-workers, even family members start coming forward. Everyone has a story. One co-worker recalls a chilling conversation. I asked Linda how she was handling everything after the attack, the woman tells detectives. She just shrugged and said, well, at least I don't have to buy as many Christmas presents this year. The woman shudders, looking down. Who says something like that about their own child? Detective Hughes isn't the only one noticing Linda's strange behavior. At the hospital, nurses notice something unsettling. Every time Linda visits Emily's room, Emily's heart rate spikes. At first, they think it's just stress, the normal reaction of a child recovering from trauma. But then they start seeing patterns. Linda visits. Emily's breathing becomes shallow. Her fingers tremble. Her body tenses. It isn't just stress. It's fear. The nurses take their concerns to the doctors. The doctors take their concerns to the police. And the police start to realize Emily might know something. Something that could break the case wide open. Detective Hughes watches Linda from across the hospital parking lot. She's standing outside, talking animatedly to a news reporter, gesturing with her hands as if she's enjoying herself. It's no longer just a suspicion. It's a certainty. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a random crime. Linda Dawson is lying. And soon, she's going to run out of places to hide. Weeks pass. The sterile walls of Mackenzie-Willamette Hospital become Emily Dawson's entire world. Machines beep softly beside her bed, measuring every heartbeat, every breath. Nurses come and go, checking her for, adjusting her bandages, whispering kind words she barely hears. Her body is healing, but her mind is trapped in the past, reliving that horrific night over and over again. She still can't speak, not because of any physical injury, but because something inside her refuses to let the words escape. The doctors monitor her closely, watching her progress. But then, they notice something strange. Every time her mother enters the room, Emily's heart rate spikes. The machine beside her bed betrays her emotions, screaming her fear in sharp, erratic beeps. At first, the doctors assume it's trauma expected, given the circumstances. But then they start tracking it. Every visit, every interaction. It's always the same. When Linda Dawson steps into the room, Emily's body tenses. Her breathing shallows. Her fingers twitch. And when Linda leaves, her heart rate settles. The nurses start watching more closely. They notice how Emily avoids eye contact with her mother, how she grips the blanket in her fists when Linda gets too close, how she turns her face toward the window, as if willing herself to disappear. This isn't just stress. This is terror. While Emily battles her silent fear, Detective Robert Hughes and his team continue their relentless investigation. The missing puzzle pieces are starting to fall into place. And then, they get a breakthrough. The forensic team finishes analyzing the bullets found in Sarah Dawson's body. The results are undeniable. They match a gun that Linda Dawson once owned. A small .22 caliber pistol, registered in her name 2 years ago. But when questioned, Linda remains firm. "I never had a gun." She sticks to the story, repeating it like a well-rehearsed script. "I don't even like guns," she says, shaking her head. "Why would I own one?" But the detectives have paperwork. A receipt. A record of purchase. A witness, a former co-worker who remembers Linda mentioning going to a shooting range once, just for fun. They don't have the gun itself, it was never found. But they have enough to prove that she lied. And if she lied about this, what else is she hiding? The public starts turning against her. At first, the town was divided. Some believed her, some whispered about how unnatural she seemed. But now, the whispers grow louder. They don't whisper anymore. They talk. "She's hiding something," says a neighbor. "I always thought she was off," a former friend confesses. Even those who wanted to believe in her innocence now have doubts. Linda, of course, knows this. And she hates it. The attention that once fueled her, the news interviews, the sympathy, the way people leaned in to listen to her dramatic retellings, it's slipping away. She sees it in the way reporters ask sharper questions. She hears it in the way people hesitate before offering condolences. She feels it in the way the detectives keep coming back, knocking on her door, picking at every inconsistency in her story. And worst of all, she sees it in Emily. The child who was supposed to be too weak to fight. Too young to understand. Too damaged to be a threat. But Emily isn't broken. She's recovering. And she knows. Detective Hughes watches Linda closely during their next interview. He sees the cracks in her armor. "Tell me again what happened that night," he says. Linda sighs, rolling her shoulders as if exhausted. "I already told you. We were driving. A man stepped onto the road. He had a gun. He shot my babies." Hughes taps his pen against his notepad. "And this man? You said he had long hair." "Yes. But before, you said he had a beard." Linda pauses. I meant he might have had a beard. It was dark. You also said he was wearing jeans." "I think so. But in the first statement, you said dark pants." Linda's jaw tightens. "What are you getting at?" Hughes leans forward. "I think you don't remember because he never existed." Silence. A long, Suffocating silence. Then Linda laughs. An actual laugh. Soft. Breathless. And just a little bit unhinged. "That's ridiculous," she says. "You're twisting my words." Hughes doesn't flinch. He just watches her. Waits. Linda shifts in her seat. Crosses her arms. Looks away. The first real sign of discomfort. While Hughes pushes Linda, the doctors prepare for something equally important. Emily Dawson, silent, terrified, but alive, is finally ready to try speaking. It's been weeks. Weeks of therapy, of soft encouragements, of gentle pushes toward communication. But now she is ready. The speech therapist sits beside her, holding her hand. "You don't have to say a lot," she tells Emily. "Just a word. A name. Anything." Emily's eyes dart toward the window. Outside, she can see the sky blue and bright, almost too bright. The world looks normal. But nothing is normal. Not anymore. She takes a shaky breath. Her throat is dry. Her lips barely move. And then, just above a whisper, a name escapes her lips. Detective Hughes gets the call immediately. He's at his desk, poring over Linda's financial records when the phone rings. He picks up. The voice on the other end belongs to the speech therapist. Emily spoke. Hughes sits up straight. What did she say? A pause. A heartbeat. Then. She said her mother's name. Linda. Not a stranger. Not a man with wild hair. Not a carjacker. Her mother. Hughes doesn't hesitate. He grabs his coat. We've got her. He's already halfway out the door. Linda Dawson's lies are coming to an end. The hospital room is quiet except for the soft hum of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses passing by in the hallway. The air is thick with anticipation, a kind of stillness before the storm. Emily Dawson sits upright in her hospital bed, her small fingers gripping the blanket draped over her lap. The little girl who once ran freely through playgrounds, laughing under the summer sun, now looks like a shadow of herself, frail, delicate, and weighed down by something far heavier than any child should carry. It has been months since that night. Months since she was pulled from a blood-soaked car, since she lay unconscious in the emergency room, since she fought through surgeries and long, painful therapy sessions. The road to recovery has been brutal. But through it all, she has remained silent. Until now. Detective Robert Hughes sits beside her, his usual sharpness softened by the weight of the moment. He doesn't rush. He doesn't push. He knows this is delicate, this is everything. He leans forward slightly, his voice low and careful. "Emily," he says gently, "do you remember who hurt you?" The little girl stiffens. Her breath catches in her throat. Her small hands tremble as she tightens her grip on the blanket. The machines around her beep steadily, monitoring her fragile heartbeat. A nurse stands in the corner, silent but watching. For a long moment, there is only silence. And then Emily's lips part. Her voice is hoarse, barely above a whisper, but the words cut through the air like a blade. "My mommy." The room feels like it stops breathing. Detective Hughes doesn't react immediately. He doesn't rush her. He lets the words settle, lets her tiny voice echo in the space between them. "My mommy," she repeats, a little louder this time, her voice cracking under the weight of what she's just admitted. Tears spill down her cheeks, but she doesn't wipe them away. She doesn't take it back. Outside the hospital, a storm rumbles in the distance. The dark clouds hang low over Springfield, Oregon, casting an eerie gloom over the small town. The streets are damp from an earlier rain, puddles reflecting the dull glow of streetlights. Inside the hospital, the storm has already begun. Hughes steps out of Emily's room, closing the door softly behind him. He exhales slowly, running a hand down his face as he turns to his partner, Detective Andrew Collins, who has been waiting just outside. She said it, Hughes murmurs, his voice unreadable. She said her mother did it? Collins lets out a sharp breath. That's it? That's the final piece. No more theories. No more guessing. No more whispers. Emily knows the truth. And now, so do they. Later that evening, Linda Dawson is at home. Her house is spotless, as always. The furniture is arranged perfectly, the air scented with fresh lavender from a candle burning on the coffee table. To any outsider, it would look like the home of a woman who has her life completely under control. Linda herself is seated at the dining table, flipping through a magazine, her nails freshly painted a glossy shade of red. Her expression is calm to calm. She has no idea what's coming. A knock at the door shatters the quiet. Linda lifts her head, frowning. She isn't expecting anyone. She sets the magazine down, smooths out the invisible wrinkles in her dress, and rises to her feet. She walks toward the door, her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. When she opens it, Detective Hughes is standing there. His expression is unreadable. Beside him, Detective Collins. And behind them, two uniformed officers. For the first time in a long time, Linda hesitates. Linda Dawson, Hughes says, his voice steady. You are under arrest for the murder of Sarah Dawson and the attempted murder of Emily and Jacob Dawson. Linda doesn't move. For the briefest of moments, there is a flicker of something in her eyes, shock. Fear. Or something else. Then, almost as if on instinct, she laughs. A small, breathless laugh, one of pure disbelief. You must be joking, she says, shaking her head. This is insane. Hughes doesn't react. He simply steps forward, his voice unwavering. Turn around, Linda. Linda's smile falters. This is a mistake. Her voice is sharp now, edged with something dangerously close to panic. The officers move forward, and for the first time, Linda Dawson is not in control. She fights. She thrashes, jerks her arms, but the officers are stronger. They force her hands behind her back, cold metal snapping around her wrists. You can't do this, she shrieks. I'm their mother. Hughes stares at her, his face expressionless. Exactly, he says. And that's what makes this even worse. The last thing Linda sees before she's dragged away is the gathering of neighbors outside watching. Some whisper. Some don't say anything at all. And for the first time in her life, Linda Dawson is powerless. Inside the police station, Linda sits in the interrogation room. The walls are gray, the air thick with tension. A small cup of water sits in front of her, untouched. The handcuffs have been removed, but she rubs at her wrists, as if feeling the weight of them still. Detective Hughes sits across from her, silent. The clock on the wall ticks. Linda finally breaks the silence. You really think I did this? She asks, her voice steady. Hughes watches her. I don't think. I know. Linda leans back in her chair, tilting her head. You have no proof. Hughes slides a folder across the table. Emily spoke today. For the first time, Linda freezes. It's only a fraction of a second, but Hughes sees it. The flicker of panic. The tightening of her jaw. She told us what happened, Hughes continues, his voice even. She told us what you did. Linda's fingers twitch. She's just a child. You can't trust a child's memory. She's your child, Hughes counters. A silence stretches between them. Then Linda smiles. A slow, calculated smile. You want a confession, she says. But you're not going to get one. Hughes doesn't react. He doesn't need her confession. He already has the truth. And soon, so will the world. The courtroom is silent as the jury files in. Each face is unreadable, a wall of blank expressions as they take their seats. The air inside the room is thick, heavy with expectation, with the weight of a verdict that has taken months to reach. The judge clears his throat, his gavel resting on the polished wood before him. Linda Dawson sits stiffly at the defense table, dressed in a pale blue suit that does little to soften the coldness in her eyes. Her hands are folded neatly in her lap. She does not tremble. She does not break. She simply waits. Across the room, Emily Dawson sits beside her father, her tiny fingers clutched around a stuffed rabbit, a quiet anchor in a storm she has barely survived. She is stronger now, her voice returned, but the innocence that once filled her wide eyes is gone. The jury foreman stands. The entire courtroom holds its breath. We, the jury, find the defendant, Linda Dawson, guilty. A gasp ripples through the gallery. Linda's lips press into a thin line. She does not look at Emily. She does not look at the judge. She simply stares ahead, expressionless. The prosecution has done its job. They have laid out the timeline, the motive, the chilling method in which Linda planned it all. She wanted a life without children. She wanted to be with Michael Reynolds, the man who made it clear that he never wanted a family. She saw Sarah, Emily, and Jacob as obstacles, standing in the way of the life she desired. And so, she removed them. One bullet at a time. Emily's testimony was the final blow, the undeniable truth from the lips of the child who survived. "My mommy," she had said. And that was all it took. The courtroom erupts. The defense attorney mutters something about an appeal, but the words fall flat in the face of the undeniable truth. The judge looks at Linda, his expression a mix of disgust and finality. His voice is calm, but the words he speaks carry the weight of absolute judgment. "Linda Dawson, you are sentenced to life in prison plus 50 years. You will never walk free again." For the first time, Linda blinks. For the first time, her composure falters just slightly. Because this is real now. The gavel strikes once. The case is closed. But the story does not end here. Before her arrest, Linda Dawson was pregnant. It was a shocking revelation, one that surfaced just weeks before her sentencing. The father was unknown, speculation running wild. Had she conceived before the attacks? Had she intentionally gotten pregnant as a final act of control? The baby, a girl, was born behind the thick walls of a prison hospital. She never knew her mother. She was taken away, adopted into another family, far from the shadow of Linda's sins. A new name. A new home. A life without the weight of the Dawson curse. She would grow up never knowing the woman who gave birth to her. And perhaps, that was the greatest mercy of all. 3 years into her sentence, in July 1987, Linda Dawson did the impossible. She escaped. The news spread like wildfire. A convicted murderer free. She had slipped through the cracks of the system, disappearing into the night like a ghost. For 10 days, she ran. For 10 days, she breathed free air. She changed her hair, changed her clothes, changed her name. She had always been a chameleon, adapting to her surroundings, bending the truth to fit whatever role she needed to play. And for 10 days, it worked. But Linda was not as clever as she thought. A witness recognized her. A tip was called in. The chase ended in a quiet suburban neighborhood, where she had been hiding in plain sight. She was dragged back to prison this time, to a maximum security facility. She would never escape again. To this day, Linda Dawson remains behind bars. She has been interviewed. She has been studied. And not once, not in the years since her arrest, not in the decades that followed, has she ever expressed regret. She does not speak of Sarah. She does not ask about Emily. She does not acknowledge the life she stole, the daughter she left behind, the chaos she created. To her, She is the victim. The world misunderstood her. The courts failed her. The system was rigged against her. And so, she waits. For what? No one knows. For freedom that will never come? For the truth to be rewritten? Or simply, for time to erase the name Linda Dawson from history? But time does not forget. And neither does the world. The prison walls are thick, lined with steel and concrete, meant to keep people like Linda Dawson from ever walking free again. Inside those walls, time moves differently. Days bleed into nights, years slip by unnoticed. The outside world continues without her, untouched by her presence. She has long since lost the control she once clung to so desperately. There are no television cameras here, no reporters hanging on her every word. No staged interviews where she can perform her innocence, no audience to manipulate with well-placed tears. The only people who speak her name now are the guards who call her by her inmate number. The other prisoners barely acknowledge her, sensing something off about the woman who walks among them with an unsettling calm, as if she still believes she is better than them all. But the world remembers. Outside, people still whisper about her case, about the mother who did the unthinkable. About how she smiled on television when her children lay in hospital beds. About how she never shed a single tear for the daughter she lost. Evil does not always wear a mask. Sometimes, it wears the face of a mother. For Emily Dawson, the past does not stay buried behind prison bars. It follows her, shaping the woman she grows to be. She does not speak her mother's name. She avoids news articles, avoids interviews, avoids the curious stares of strangers who recognize her from a case that refuses to fade into history. She has lived 1,000 lives since that night: child, survivor, witness, victim. And yet, no matter how much time passes, she is always that little girl in the hospital bed, whispering the words that sealed her mother's fate. She does not hate Linda. That would be too easy. What she feels is something worse. Nothing. Because Linda Dawson is a ghost. A shadow of a person who once held her hand, tucked her into bed, kissed her goodnight. That woman is gone. And perhaps, she never existed at all. Far from the prison, another life unfolds, one untouched by Linda's sins. The child she gave birth to before her arrest grows up with a different name, a different family. A girl who never knew her infamous mother, who never had to carry the weight of that legacy. She does not recognize the face on the documentaries, the grainy courtroom footage replayed in true crime specials. She does not flinch when she hears the name Linda Dawson, because to her, it is just a name. She will never visit the prison where her biological mother spends her days. She will never sit across from her in a cold, steel-lined visitation room. She will never ask why. Because she does not need to know. Some stories are better left untold. How could a mother betray her own children? It is a question that lingers, that unsettles us. Because we want to believe that mothers protect. That they love unconditionally. But cases like this remind us of a harsher truth. Evil does not always look like a monster. Sometimes, it looks like a mother tucking her children into bed. Sometimes, it smiles. Sometimes, it says "I love you" before pulling the trigger. Linda Dawson was not the first mother to commit an unthinkable act. And she will not be the last. Which is why we must always trust our instincts. Look beyond appearances. And remember that sometimes, the greatest danger comes from the people closest to us. This case shocked the world, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and painful truths. What do you think about this chilling story? Was Linda Dawson born this way, or did something in her break over time? Could anyone have stopped her before it was too late? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy deep dive crime stories like this, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. More chilling stories are coming your way. Stay safe. And always, question the truth.